Have you ever had a situation that's come to court hearing where there wasn't an agreement on real estate value and the court had to make that decision?
I have, and I'll be honest, I think.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Holly Mullin. I am the managing partner with Sterling Law Offices, and I have with me today attorney Mike Kyrios. Mike and I have worked together at Sterling for going on 5 years, I believe. And prior to that, Mike was with a different family law and estate planning firm. Mike, you've been practicing for what, about 11, 12 years, somewhere in that ballpark?
Yep, coming up on 12 years now. Yeah, of
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today.
course.
I want to focus our attention today on a conversation that's very important in just about every single divorce we handle, which is ensuring appropriate valuation of assets. So, we talk a lot about splitting things in divorce equally and, 50-50. But how do we know we're actually getting the right division and an equal division if we don't have the right value on the assets? It's not always straightforward. So, let's start with one that I would say is the most commonly questioned asset when it comes to value, which is real estate. Um, we might have vacant land. We might have a single family home. We might have a condominium or a multifamily rental property. Can spouses just agree to use Zillow and call it a day, or what happens? How do they go about valuing real estate?
Yeah, so thanks again for having me here. And I'll just say really quick before I answer your question, I think that property division and how we divide things and value things is really important because it's really the one issue that's going to come up in every single case. You may or may not have kids, you may or may not have spousal support, but every case is going to involve some division of property. So it's really important to be thoughtful and make sure that you're doing things above board here. So to answer your question, short answer is yes. People can just use Zillow or some other method to assign a value to real estate, and if people agree on that, it's perfectly fine. The court's generally not going to second guess what two people agree that their property is worth. Having said that, there are pitfalls on that. Zillow obviously is not exactly accurate. It has nobody coming out to inspect your property. It doesn't really account for the condition of your property. It's really looking at what are sales like for properties in that area, for based on the size, based on the bedrooms, what have you. But it doesn't know about the leak in your basement, right? So it can be very accurate, but it shouldn't be taken as gospel, and ignoring these other methods that we have. So, yes, people can agree on a Zillow value. There's other, sites as well, Trulia, Redfin. Sometimes you'll get some variation there.
Sure.
Uh, but if you agree, great. That's pretty much can be the end of it.
And if you can't, then what's next?
Yep. So there's a couple different ways to do it. Some people I've had cases where, we take maybe an average of those different sites that we've been talking about. So Zillow, Trulia, Redfin, you can put that all and kind of get a rough estimate on average. And again, if that's acceptable to everybody, great, so be it. Where you run into the next steps is when you can't agree using those other tools. So there's a couple different ways that you can go about that then. One of them is to get what we call a comparative market analysis. That is done by a real estate agent. They are not inspecting your individual home, but it's looking likewise at comparable sales in the area and giving sort of an estimated value. One of the benefits of that is that it's typically free, and then you sort of have an established connection with a realtor if you ultimately are, maybe going to try to sell it. So it's kind of good to maybe start building that relationship. That also brings up a good point, which is that you don't have to get something valued if you are going to sell it. So a lot of times, if you think of a nuclear family with a family home, it may be that neither party wants or can afford the home individually. And so we're going to sell it as part of the process.
Okay.
And if that's the case, then we don't have to get it valued because the purchase price, the fair market will give you what that value is. And then you may have some discussion as to how we're going to divide the proceeds, that sort of thing. But you don't have to go specifically get an appraisal.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. So meaning if somebody's going to keep the property, somebody wants to be awarded it in the divorce, valuing it is going to be very important. Whereas if the parties are going to sell it, whoever buys it on the open market is going to essentially determine what the fair market value is. So why appraise it when it's going to be valued based on the purchase price?
Exactly, exactly. So I mentioned the comparative market analysis, and then you said the word appraisal. So appraisals is an alternative to that comparative market analysis. That involves getting an actual licensed appraiser to come out and inspect your property. And so again, whereas Zillow, nobody's looking at the condition of your house. Comparative market analysis, they're not really looking at the condition of the house. The appraiser's going through and checking the condition of the roof and the basement, and is there water there, and all of these different things. They are also then looking at comparable sales in the area. Long story short, they do a report and basically assign what they estimate in their professional opinion the fair market value to be. There is a cost to doing appraisals. It's usually in the maybe $400 to $500 range, depending on who you use and where you're at. So it's not small peanuts, but it is, I think, well worth the investment in many cases, because for many people, their real estate, their house is the largest, if not one of the largest pieces of property that they own. And an appraisal can be tens of thousands of dollars off from what Zillow has it at. And so if you can invest, if you will, the $400 or $500, and then maybe recoup some of that extra value many times over, it can be well worth the investment.
And just the peace of mind, right? When it's that big of an asset, it's that important in your overall settlement. Four
At
to
the
five
end of,
hundred dollars is still $400 to $500, right? Nobody wants to light that money on fire, but if it gives you peace of mind of this is the right value, you're not getting the short end of the stick. That's probably a very smart investment, as you said.
yeah, and at the end of the day, I think most people have a general sense of what their home might be worth, but I'm an attorney. I'm not a real estate agent. I don't really know truly at the end of the day what my house is worth. And so just like you said, that peace of mind, making sure that you have an outside professional that's coming in and giving a informed opinion rather than just sort of a gut feeling on it.
How do you typically handle real estate valuations? You have a new divorce. Do you lean towards one valuation approach from the jump, or walk me through that?
Well, that's a good question. I try to come into it, I guess, with an open mind, in part because I think it really depends on the dynamics of the parties. Do you have two people that can get along reasonably well and can have a discussion, or do you have a couple that can't agree what color the sky is? And so, if you have some degree of cooperation between the parties, then typically my suggestion to somebody is, "Hey, my client, that is, hey, the Zillow is this. Do you think that that's accurate?" Yes, okay, let's propose it to the other side and see if they'll agree on that. Because it does save people money. If they think it's accurate, who am I to really second guess? Again, I'm not a real estate agent. And that's sort of my preferred starting point, I suppose, if the parties can have a productive conversation. If they can't, or if I go to my client and say, hey, Zillow has it at X, do you think that's accurate? No, I don't. Then typically I'll suggest let's just go ahead and get an appraisal. If parties are really tight on funds and maybe that $400 or $500 is going to be really burdensome for them, then I could suggest then to have somebody go out and get a comparative market analysis. But generally speaking, I feel a little bit more comfortable with an actual appraisal as opposed to the market analysis. So to long story short, answer your question, it really depends on the circumstances. It depends on the parties. It depends on maybe how far apart we are. But I will usually start by exploring whether agreeing with a Zillow or other internet value is appropriate, and then kind of go from there.
And you'll guide your clients through that and sort of here's our options, and here's where I think we should start, and we can always take it up a notch if we need to. It sounds like you kind of provide that guidance as they work through that decision.
Absolutely, and ultimately, it is their decision. I mean, it's not my decision as to whether we get an appraisal or not. And if I think that if somebody suggests that they want an appraisal, I do not try to talk them out of it. I don't try to, convince them to do something else. I mean, that people have a right to get this done and to have an actual value. And so ultimately, it is the client's choice.
Sure. So when it comes to doing, let's say, a comparative market analysis or an appraisal, right? You're obviously choosing a realtor or you're choosing appraiser to do those valuations. Do the parties have to agree, or how is that individual chosen in order to provide a valuation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's no right or wrong answer. Generally speaking, I think in the majority of cases, the attorneys or the parties will pick an appraiser jointly, and then this will be a joint appraiser. So that person is neutral, and it's providing a service to both clients, not favoring one or the other. That's the majority of cases. So there are a number of different appraisers based on where you are in the state, and if there's any unique characteristics about the property, maybe a large parcel of undeveloped land versus a single family home. But there are sort of a kind of a standard list of people that get used a lot in the context of divorces. So usually we'll float one of those names to the other attorney. We see if we can get on the same page. Usually that's not terribly controversial, and then we have that joint appraisal. But there are situations either where somebody then maybe doesn't agree with that appraisal value, or we can't agree on who our appraiser is going to be, and then each party is absolutely entitled to get their own appraisal separately. And then to the extent that there's a big gap between those values, either you're essentially negotiating, okay, in light of these two values, where are we going to end up here? And what's an appropriate compromise number? Or ultimately, if you can't, then you have those people appear at a trial as expert witnesses and let the court make the decision based on what the court hears.
Have you ever had a situation that's come to a court hearing where there wasn't an agreement on real estate value and the court had to make that decision?
I have, and I'll be honest, I think a lot of times what the court is going to do is look to see if one is maybe a little bit more of an experienced appraiser or has more expertise in that local area. That might tip the scales a little bit. Or the court might take the easy way out and say, you know what, you have it at 300, you have it at 400, let's call it 350. Because I think the judge likewise is not a real estate agent. They're not an appraiser. They if they're hearing two expert opinions that don't align with each other, they may split the baby.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, this was very enlightening. I really appreciate all of the insight, Mike. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to some future conversations about additional assets to be valued in a divorce.
Perfect. Thank you again for having me.
Getting the right value on your home is critical, but what if you and your spouse can't agree on anything, let alone the value of the house? So when tensions rise, some couples rush straight to court. But there's another path that can save time, money, and stress. In our next episode, we break down how mediation really works and when it's the smarter choice.